Right now, while you're watching this, the United States is building the most expensive missile shield in human history. $175 billion. A system that can intercept hypersonic missiles traveling over Mach 20. Coverage across 3,800,000 square miles. 4 integrated layers. Orbiting satellites detecting threats from space. Ground radars tracking trajectories. Missile interceptors ready for the kill. And high-power lasers as the last line of defense. The promise is simple. No ballistic missile, no hypersonic vehicle, no cruise missile gets through. The Golden Dome makes nuclear first strikes technically obsolete. That's the story the White House wants you to believe. But there's something buried deep in the architecture of this system that no interceptor can protect. A structural flaw that the American Department of Defense itself has already publicly acknowledged, and that the current budget can't cover. Remember Stuxnet, the attack that destroyed Iranian nuclear centrifuges without firing a single bullet, compromising the control systems that ran them? What Iran demonstrated in February 2026 is version 2.0 of that same playbook. But this time, targeting the largest defense system in American history. Donald Trump signed the executive order that created the Golden Dome on January 27, 2025. The idea seemed simple on the surface. Replicate, on a national scale, the concept of the Israeli Iron Dome. Cover the entire American territory with a defense mesh, capable of intercepting any threat before it touches the ground. On May 20, 2025, 4 months later, the system was publicly introduced to the world. The official number, $175 billion. An astronomical amount, but justifiable when you consider what it promises to deliver. The political narrative was seductive, a shield that had made nuclear first strikes obsolete, that had put America in unprecedented strategic invulnerability, a definitive solution to the missile threat. But that price tag hides a problem, a massive inconsistency. We're going to explore it in detail because the real cost will completely change your perspective. Here's what matters before anything else. Not the budget, not the politics. It's the architecture. That's exactly where the flaw lives. And without understanding how this system's built on the inside, you can't understand why the recent Iranian attack changes everything. To understand the problem, you need to understand how the Golden Dome really works. First thing, this isn't just hardware. It's one of the most complex digital architectures ever designed for military purposes. The system operates in 4 integrated layers. Each layer, no matter how impressive individually, only works because it's connected to all the others in real time. The first layer is in space. Thousands of orbital assets, tracking satellites, early warning satellites, constellations of specialized sensors, constantly monitoring any object on a potential threat trajectory. These satellites must communicate data in real time to the layers below. Speed, trajectory, altitude, threat type, probability of impact. All of it processed and transmitted in milliseconds. Why? Because in a real attack, the decision window is measured in seconds, not minutes. The second layer is the ground radars. Facilities spread across the country, each with enough range and discrimination capacity to distinguish a real warhead from a decoy. They receive data from the satellites and refine it. They communicate constantly with the satellites above and the interception systems below. Without interruption, without latency, without failure. The third layer is the missile interceptors. These are what most people picture when they think of missile defense, the physical projectiles that launch from the ground to destroy threats mid-flight. But these interceptors don't work autonomously. They receive commands from control systems fed by radar data, which in turn receive data from the satellites. The entire decision chain, from threat detection to launch, relies on flawless digital communication across all layers. Remove any link and the system can't respond. The fourth layer is the ground lasers. The newest technology in the array, directed energy weapon systems that can intercept cruise missiles and drones in the lower atmosphere. More sophisticated than anything operationally deployed before. And like the previous 3 layers, completely dependent on control networks, completely dependent on real-time data, completely dependent on digital communication with the other systems. Think of each layer as a link in a chain of command. The satellite sees the threat. The radar confirms it. The control system decides. The interceptor acts. Break any link. The signal doesn't arrive. The interceptor doesn't launch. the threat gets through. And that's exactly what an attack on the system's control networks can do. No shots fired from the opposing side. Just one broken link. 4 layers, 4 critical dependencies. One question none of the official presentations answer. What happens when the connection between them is cut? Planned coverage, 3,800,000 square miles. Capability against hypersonic vehicles at over Mach 20. Budget for 2025, $24.4 billion. For 2026, $13 billion. The Missile Defense Agency signed a $151 billion development contract. Thousands of satellites. Radars across the entire country. Interceptors at multiple bases. Directed energy lasers. All exchanging data in real time, constantly, to function. Each additional layer means additional digital connections. Each digital connection is a potential attack surface, and the Golden Dome doesn't have 4 separate, isolated attack surfaces. It's a single integrated network where every component depends on all the others. Which threat do you engage first? Which one do you let pass while the system's overwhelmed? How much of that decision-making relies on digital networks working perfectly at the most critical moment? Because if someone breaches the network that makes all of this work, the question changes. It's no longer what the system can intercept in the sky. It's whether the system can function at all. The hardware's just the visible part. What actually controls these systems is a category of technology called OT, operational technology. Digital control networks that operate physical infrastructure. The distinction matters. When you access your bank account online, you're using IT, information technology, systems that process data. But when a hydroelectric dam opens or closes its floodgates, when air traffic systems guide planes to runways, when industrial facilities operate machinery, that's OT. It's not just data processing, it's the physical control of real-world systems. The Golden Dome, at its core, is a massive OT system. The operational control networks that tell satellites where to point, that make radars track specific threats, that coordinate interceptor launches at the exact right moment. All of it is operational technology. And OT has a fundamental characteristic that sets it apart from ordinary IT. When you compromise an OT system, you don't steal data. You take physical control of something that exists in the real world. And here's where it gets truly serious. The Pentagon has already publicly acknowledged that the cybersecurity of the Golden Dome's OT networks is a critically underfunded gap. It's not external analysis. It's not speculation by independent researchers. It's the Defense Department's own assessment. Military planners know this vulnerability exists. They know it's not adequately funded. And yet the system is being built exactly as it is. For a historical precedent of what compromised OT does to military systems, look at Stuxnet. In 2010, a computer worm, developed with sophistication that pointed to state actors, penetrated the control networks of uranium enrichment facilities in Iran. It didn't steal data. It didn't visibly shut down the systems. It caused Iranian centrifuges to progressively destroy themselves while the monitors showed everything operating normally. Compromised OT doesn't look compromised until it's too late. A missile interceptor controlled by a compromised network isn't a missile interceptor. It's an extremely expensive piece of hardware waiting for a command that'll never arrive. Or worse, waiting for a spoofed command that'll send it to the wrong place. Imagine a hypersonic missile is detected by satellites. The control nodes that should trigger interceptors receive false data, or just silence. The interceptor never gets the command. The system appears to work. The monitors show normal parameters, and the threat slips right through. Want to know if Iran has the capability to trigger exactly this scenario? There's a very concrete answer. Because they just ran the experiment in the real world, with documented results. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel conducted a large-scale coordinated military operation against Iranian military and missile infrastructure. Operation Epic Fury, as it became known, wasn't a one-off strike or a political message to demonstrate capability. It was a structured campaign targeting core components of Iran's offensive architecture, missile facilities, launch capabilities, and the support infrastructure that allowed Iran to project threats to regional targets and beyond. The strategic logic was built on months of gradual escalation. The Iranian role in supplying ballistic missiles and drones to actors threatening Israeli and American targets had crossed unacceptable thresholds for military planners in Washington and Tel Aviv. The decision was to act preemptively, at a scale sufficient to degrade real capability, not just send a signal. The attacked infrastructure was exactly what the Golden Dome was designed to neutralize: launch pads, missile depots, command and control systems for mass strikes. From a missile defense perspective, Operation Epic Fury was the very justification for the Golden Dome's existence. The international reaction was intense and predictable. Condemnations, diplomatic warnings, concerns about regional stability. The usual cycle. But while analysts debated the diplomatic implications, something else was unfolding in parallel. Something cyber threat monitors detected immediately, long before any conventional Iranian response could be structured. Iran wasn't waiting. And the response revealed exactly what Iran understands about where Western defense systems are truly vulnerable. The Iranian response wasn't generic. It was targeted, it was fast, and it went after industrial control systems. In the hours and days following Operation Epic Fury, an Iranian cyber campaign was launched against American and Israeli targets with speed and scope that indicated prior planning, not reactive improvisation. Distributed denial-of-service attacks overwhelming digital infrastructure, destructive wiper malware deployed across selected networks, software designed not to steal data, but to destroy it, active espionage and reconnaissance operations against critical networks. A multifaceted campaign launched almost simultaneously with the conventional military operation. One stream of this campaign was given a specific name: Cyber Islamic Resistance Axis. And this faction claimed credit for something deserving far more attention: the compromise of Israeli industrial control systems. Not corporate data, not intelligence information, control systems. The specific number they released changes everything. It's the kind of number that, when you understand what it truly means, completely changes how we think about the Golden Dome. The concrete test case was Control Applications Limited, an Israeli firm operating in industrial control systems and automation. What the Iranian operation achieved wasn't an email breach or a database leak. It was the compromise of 130 remote OT, operational technology units, 130 remote control units, compromised, in a single operation. Meanwhile, on March 3, 2026, CISA, the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, issued a public acknowledgement that its resources were stretched thin, managing the Iranian threat level. Carefully worded bureaucratic language, but translated: we're struggling to keep up with Iran's cyber pace. Think about what those 130 systems represent. This wasn't a single system compromised after months of stealthy work. It was 130 remote control units, at a single target, in a single event, as an immediate response to a conventional military strike. The speed and scale tell you something about the preparation level. This wasn't improvised. It was planned, developed, and waiting for a trigger. Imagine the same capability, more refined, focused, and motivated, with ample preparation time, directed not at an industrial control company, but at the OT network of an American missile defense system. A system with 4 integrated layers, thousands of satellites, radars across an entire country, interceptors at multiple bases, all relying on flawless OT communication. We're not talking about a theoretical vulnerability in hypothetical scenarios anymore. We're talking about a demonstrated capability. A concrete number, a named victim, a timestamp. Iran didn't just claim it could compromise critical infrastructure OT systems. It actually did. And the inevitable question: if they can do this against an Israeli industrial control company, what could they do against the digital backbone of the most expensive system in American history? Compromising 130 OT units is not like stealing 130 files. When hackers exfiltrate data, the compromised system keeps running. You might not even know you were breached. The damage is informational. But compromising an OT unit means seizing control of a system that acts on the physical world. And the possibilities that opens are in an entirely different category. A compromised OT system can be silenced, rendered unable to receive or transmit commands, creating a communications blackout exactly when communication's most critical. It can be manipulated into sending false data, making sensors report fictitious readings, incorrect trajectories, threats that don't exist, or hiding threats that do. It can be commanded to execute destructive actions while appearing to operate normally. That's exactly what Stuxnet did to Iranian centrifuges. And that's exactly what the Operation Against Control Applications Luddy-Duddy proved is possible in modern OT systems. Now apply that logic to the Golden Dome. The system's decision chain, from satellite launch detection to interceptor firing, relies on flawless, real-time OT communication between every layer. Satellites feeding data to ground radars. Radars refining that data and transmitting to command systems. Command systems coordinating interceptors. Every link in this chain is an OT network. If an adversary breaches any point of this network, doesn't matter which layer, doesn't matter which specific node, the potential for damage is devastating. Spoofed tracking data sending interceptors to wrong coordinates. Incorrect launch windows sent to weapon systems. Artificial delays at critical decision points. Or simply, silence. No response when systems should operate at maximum capacity. And the Iranian cyber retaliation confirmed what security analysts had been warning. Critical infrastructure OT systems are priority targets. The compromise of Control Applications Limited wasn't opportunistic. It was a deliberate signal of capability. A real test with real results executed in direct response to conventional military action. The question is straightforward. Does the $175 billion announced by the White House cover closing this gap? Or are we building a hardware fortress with a backdoor the budget can't afford to lock? The White House announced the Golden Dome at $175 billion, a staggering number. Put it into context with what the system promises, and it even seems justifiable. Seems like it might be worth it. The problem? $175 billion isn't the true cost. Independent projections, analyses outside the White House's political communication, estimate the true cost between $831 billion and $3.6 trillion. Not billions, trillions. $3.6 trillion is equivalent to Germany's entire GDP, the world's fourth largest economy. It puts the Golden Dome in a class of its own, unprecedented in defense program history. Why the massive discrepancy between the official number and independent projections? Because $175 billion is the initial development cost. Design, prototyping, and development contracts. The cost to build, deploy, integrate, maintain, and operate the system nationally over decades pushes the number into the trillions. And that second number is what really matters when figuring out what can or can't be funded. As of March 2026, the Golden Dome wasn't operational, it was in development. And it's precisely in this development phase that OT cybersecurity needs to be built from the ground up, not patched on after deployment. There's a critical difference in cost and effectiveness between building OT cybersecurity into the architecture and trying to add it retroactively. It's the difference between building a fireproof building and trying to install fire extinguishers after the walls are already up. Funds allocated so far, $24.4 billion in 2025. $13 billion in 2026, cover the initial phases. Where does OT protection sit in funding priorities? The Pentagon acknowledges chronic underfunding of this area. But the publicly available budgetary trajectory shows no evidence of this changing structurally. The arithmetic is simple and brutal. If the system's true cost is between $831 billion and $3.6 trillion, if OT cybersecurity is a critical gap recognized by planners themselves, and if allocated funds nowhere near cover the total project cost, then protecting the Golden Dome's most serious vulnerability is, by definition, at the back of a line that can't possibly be funded by current budgets. The system designed to make America safe has a known vulnerability the official budget doesn't cover. This isn't speculation. It's math applied to public numbers. There's a recurring pattern in warfare history that explains exactly what's happening with the Golden Dome. And once you see the analogy, you can't unsee it. The Maginot Line is the most famous example. In the 1930s, France built what was, by the standards of the time, the most sophisticated defense line in history. Reinforced concrete bunkers built to withstand any bombardment. Artillery positioned to deny any frontal advance. Underground facilities with months of supplies. An extraordinary work of military engineering. And it worked, perfectly, for the war it was designed for. The problem? Germany in 1940 didn't fight that war. They bypassed the Maginot Line completely through Belgium and the Ardennes, where no one had planned for large-scale armored invasion. The Maginot Line wasn't captured. It was simply ignored. It became irrelevant before it was even tested. The Golden Dome is becoming the cyber equivalent of the Maginot Line. It's an extraordinarily sophisticated defense against the attack vector it's trying to intercept, physical missiles traveling ballistic trajectories through airspace. But the relevant adversary is attacking through a different vector. Not missiles in the sky, code in the networks. And the defense system, as impressive as its kinetic capabilities are, was built with a recognized gap in the very dimension where the real attack might come. Consider the cost asymmetry. The Golden Dome costs between $175 billion and $3.6 trillion to build and maintain. A sophisticated cyber operation against OT networks costs a fraction of that. A few $1,000,000 for research, development, and execution. Possibly less, depending on prior access. Stuxnet was developed with superpower resources, but the knowledge of how to attack industrial OT systems has spread throughout the cybersecurity community. The cost of attack has dropped dramatically. The cost of defense has skyrocketed. This asymmetry is the essence of the strategic problem. In the cyber domain, the attacker has a structural advantage. A defense system like the Golden Dome needs to protect every node, every link, every network interface, every OT layer simultaneously and flawlessly. The attacker only needs to find a single viable entry point. In an OT network as complex as the Golden Dome, especially one the Pentagon admitted lacks sufficient cyber protection budget, that entry point exists as a statistical inevitability. Stuxnet proved in 2010 that OT systems controlling physical weapons can be compromised remotely by determined actors. The recent operation against control applications Latitude proved this capability isn't exclusive to superpowers anymore. It belongs to states with mature cyber programs and strategic motivation. And Iran arguably has one of the most developed offensive cyber programs outside the West. The deeper strategic question is this: what does missile defense doctrine mean when the critical vulnerability isn't in the sky, but in the networks? If the defense architecture assumes the problem is kinetic, launching interceptors to destroy physical threats, but the adversary solves it differently, attacking the control system before the interceptor launches, then the doctrine was built on an incomplete premise. You can't intercept malware with a missile. That sentence sounds simple. The implications aren't. As of March 2026, the Golden Dome remained in development, not yet operational. And the OT cybersecurity gap the Pentagon pointed out as critical and underfunded remained, according to available indicators, without the structural budget to adequately fix it. Will Operation Epic Fury and the Iranian cyber response change procurement priorities? Possibly. The Iranian demonstration of operational OT capability against a critical infrastructure target caught the attention of planning circles that matter. But attention isn't budget. And the abyss between $175 billion and $3.6 trillion doesn't disappear because of a wake-up call, no matter how serious. The strategic questions remaining are difficult. Is it possible to adequately harden the Golden Dome's OT architecture within current budgets? What would that hardening actually require? Not in theory, but as a line item in already scarce defense budgets. Is there any realistic scenario where a system of this scale can be adequately protected against adversaries with demonstrated OT cyber capability and the motivation to use it? There are no simple answers. Any analysis offering simple answers isn't being honest about the complexity. The Golden Dome might be the most technically impressive shield ever designed, but a shield with a flaw the adversary knows how to exploit, identified by its own planners as inadequately funded, is a different promise from the one announced on May 20th, 2025. The most important question about the Golden Dome isn't whether it can intercept a hypersonic missile at Mach 20. It's whether the networks that tell the interceptor when and where to go will be reliable at the most critical moment, when an adversary with demonstrated OT capability has every motivation to do exactly what the Pentagon admitted it lacks the funds to prevent. Want to keep following this story? Because it's far from over. Turn on notifications and subscribe to the channel.